Well, thank you very much, Andrew, and can I welcome everyone to our March 2021 virtual Cabinet meeting. Present at the meeting tonight are members of the Cabinet and a number of council officers and other councillors also present. I will ask them to introduce themselves if they come in to speak on an item. Can I remind everyone present to turn their mobile phones to silent, as there is nothing worse than listening to a vibrating phone when trying to listen to someone making important points. I would also refer you all to the published protocols for holding virtual meetings, noting the following. So I've got a list here somewhere. Can Cabinet members keep their videos on at all times but put microphones on mute unless speaking? Other members and participants should switch off their videos and put microphones on mute until they are invited to speak. If you would like to speak, please use the hand function and I will call you in. Nothing worse than everyone trying to speak at once. In case of a technical problem, the meeting will adjourn until the issue is resolved. If a technical problem just affects me, then Councillor Ferry, as Deputy Leader, will take over chairing this meeting. If the technical problem persists for everyone and the meeting is incorrect, the meeting will be adjourned and rearranged for a later date. I remind you that this is a public meeting. It is being audio and video recorded and will be available on the council website shortly. Before we start, so I just got a few points. Just for arrangements of the agenda, I would like to propose that item 8, which is the COVID-19 update, the monthly report, be moved up the agenda and heard after public questions. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Before we formally start the meeting tonight, I would like to take a few moments to reflect on the past year in Harrow. On the 19th of March last year, we held a socially distanced cabinet meeting with 4 councillors or 4 cabinet members, 2 officers in the large committee room, and others are joining by telephone. Probably 4 days later, on the 23rd of March, the Prime Minister announced that the country was going into lockdown to try and bring under control the virus that had spread around the world. It is incredible to think we have been living with the virus for a year now. We have become accustomed to online meetings, and through the reports that we have discussed as councillors, through social media, through our own contacts, through the community and voluntary sectors, and through our own friends and families, we have seen the heroic acts of kindness where people have gone out of their way to support others in their time of need. I think COVID has also shone a very strong spotlight on so many challenges and so much unfairness. We have seen rising poverty and rising health inequalities. We have seen rising demand on our services, including domestic violence and safeguarding. It is important for all of us to listen to and recognise the scale of violence across the country against women and girls. Last night, I was proud, like many other boroughs, we lit the Civic Centre up orange, which is the colour that the United Nations uses to represent action against gender-based violence. We can and must all contribute towards changing attitudes to end violence against women and girls, and we will be doing more as a council as we rebuild services across Harrow coming out of the pandemic. Over the past year, we've also seen great sadness. It is so sad that in the past 12 months, 674 Harrow residents have died from COVID. That's 675 lives tragically lost, family members who have still not been able to mourn and who are struggling to come to terms with their grief. As a council, and that's right across the council, we are taking part in the National Day of Reflection next Tuesday, a chance to pay respects to those who have died and those affected by the coronavirus pandemic. And I would like to encourage you all to take part, from a minute's silence at lunchtime, midday at lunchtime, to a doorstep vigil for 8 o'clock. The Civic Centre will also be lit up at 8 o'clock in yellow, the colour of the Marie Curie charity, to remember the 674 people we have lost in Harrow. As well as taking part in the national event itself, we are hosting an online commemoration page for those who have been affected by COVID to post messages and pictures about loved ones, friends or colleagues lost during the pandemic, and details of this will be emailed out through the My Harrow newsletter and social media channels. It's been a long, hard year, and I often say it's been relentless. The regular testing and the rollout of the vaccine offers us all hope of a brighter tomorrow. Later this year, we will all come together as one community within Harrow to formally commemorate those people by planting 21 trees, a lasting memory to all those who have been affected by COVID in our borough. In the meantime, I would ask that you go online, pay your respects really to those people next Tuesday. And in the meantime, I'd ask, please stay safe and take every precaution to do so. I would now like to formally open the meeting. So item 1 on the agenda tonight is apologies for absence. I haven't received any apologies tonight. Item 2, declarations of interest. Declarations of interest by members of Cabinet have been published on the website. Can you please note that Councillor Krishna Suresh has declared a non-pecuniary interest in item 10, and can Cabinet also note that Councillor Varsha Palmer has declared a disclosable pecuniary interest in item 5 of the agenda, in that husband works for London Underground. As you will be aware, Varsha, as a dispensation, will remain in the virtual meeting for the duration of this item. Can I have any other declarations from members present in this virtual meeting, please? I don't see any hands come up. If any interest become to your attention during the meeting, could you please indicate and we can register it at that time. We now move to item 3, which is petitions. Petitioners have 1 minute to read out the items of the petition. So are there any petitions from Cabinet members? There's no hands risen. Are there any petitions from councillors present in the virtual meeting? No. Are there any petitions from members of the public? I haven't been notified any. Is there any that wish to be presented? No, there isn't. Thank you. So that moves on to item 4, which is public questions. 1 public question has been received and up to 15 minutes will be allowed for this item. In order to maximise the time available, the published question will be taken as read and we will proceed directly to the answer and supplementary question. So the question is from Mr. John Cobb and it's directed to me. I know Mr. Cobb is on the call. If you want to switch your video on, Mr. Cobb, then on microphone, we're about to see you. The question really is has asked that I outline the enforcement policy for the Greenbelt and the status of enforcement notice ENF 0603-14P. The answer is we've had this. I've asked the officers to investigate and give me an explanation of what's happening around this enforcement notice. There is not a bespoke enforcement policy for the Greenbelt. Rather, there is an enforcement policy categorising breaches in accordance to their priority, which is based against the most harmful. The policy is available on the council's web page. In relation to the enforcement notice you have mentioned, I do believe there's different numbers materialised here. An enforcement notice was issued in October 2019, and once the notice was served, the works were stopped. Given the limited budget for taking direct action, the council have to prioritise such action. In this case, the owner of the site is untraceable, so taking action against them would result in a financial risk to the council with no certain method to recuperate the costs. Furthermore, these works do not harm the openness of the Greenbelt to such an extent to justify this financial risk. The council is exploring enforcement options with the Drainage Authority with regard to the bridge over the River Pin at this location, as there may be legislation under the drainage bylaws to initiate enforcement action in this regard. In relation to Enforcement Order 0603/14P, a section 1215 notice was served, which is the tidy up notice, and it is still applicable. In order to initiate formal enforcement action, the planning authority needs to be sure of the actual use of the site which is questioned. There is some evidence to suggest agricultural use here on and off. If the site is in agricultural use and the structures on the site are used in association with the agricultural use, the council could be liable for compensation. So the planning authority, which is the council, are in the process of seeking further legal advice regarding next steps on this enforcement notice. Mr. Cobb, do you have a supplementary question?
I think can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Oh, there you are. I can see you now. Thank you.
Well, thank you ever so much for that. That helps clarify the situation, because I was feeling that it wasn't being pursued in sufficient detail. There are 2 points that you raised. Well, may I comment on those briefly? One is that Mr. Marco Rossi, who owns the land where the bridge and the hardcore road has been placed next to Roger Bannister playing fields, is an Italian. He claims to be living in Italy. But we have provided the name and the address that he uses in London for his other business to the council. So it's just interesting that they're saying he can't be traced. The second one is that on the enforcement notice, we provided pictures over the years of the field, and this comes down to the difference between commercial agriculture and agriculture. And I'm not clear how the council views the difference, because in my mind, commercial agriculture means there's a business, an operating business, there's accounts, there's production, there's proof that, of ongoing business activities. And I would urge the council to investigate it as an operating business rather than as a claimed agricultural business, which I think is in dispute. The point I wanted to raise afterwards, which was a question, is that the local magistrates' courts are now hearing local authority or sitting on local authority business every Thursday since the 14th of January. And I accept the point that obviously the council has to accept the risks associated with registering a court order, but at the same time, I think applying to the court to have an order served is something that should happen. And I would ask, what is the prioritization of these cases when you have a share of a day each week since the 14th of January to cover, I suppose, a whole mass of issues coming out of the council? But obviously enforcement is probably a key one, especially if people living close to the green belt.
Thank you, Mr. Cobb. You've asked a number of different questions. We're allowed it to go on slightly because it is quite, to me, it's quite complicated, and I think legal issues sometimes are around this. We do have an officer dedicated to enforcement prosecutions, and that's funded through the fines secured for the Proceeds of Crime Act to continue this important work. The point you make around availability of court time, we have, as over the past few years, had a difficulty actually getting court time to prosecute some cases because they are prioritised within the courts since they've been closed down. So when Harrow Court closed down, we had quite a campaign to try and keep it open, but the number of cases are building up, and I think the court systems themselves have declared that some cases could take 2 or 3 years to actually materialise in court because of the amount of the backlog of cases being pushed through. We do normally get around between 80 and 100, we issues between 80 and 100 enforcement notices a year, and the council looks to try and take through about 10 of those for direct action. That will be prioritised around the effect it's having and the extent of the damage being caused, so it's been outside of the planning regulations. And these are quite time-consuming cases. My previous role as a cabinet member covering legal services, I remember some of these one of them taking over a year, and it takes up a lot of people's time. So not something that's quite quick to programme. So we'll have to look at see how far where we can take that action that you desire, and we're looking forward to. And as you say, there is a question around agricultural land and commercial agricultural land, which only a legal team can probably answer. So with the information that you say you've been provided, if the officers haven't got that, they're on the, some of them are on the call tonight listening in anyway, and if they need any further information, they're about to contact you if they haven't got it. But I would assume they would have looked at all avenues through league when they developed their legal case to make sure we've got a good chance of actually winning it and also recouping any costs that we might win from it. But if there's any further action on it, then we'll look to update you as we go forwards.
Yeah, thank you all very much for that. I very much appreciate the opportunity to ask the question, and I'll take it on with the officers concerned, and many of them have been very helpful over the years. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Cole. That now takes us to sorry, I've got so many documents open here. Right, that now takes us on to item 8, which is the COVID update. So while Sean's readying himself, as you will have seen, the number of residents testing positive for COVID is steadily reducing in Harrow, although we are still above the London average for the number of cases, and this is most definitely not the time to throw caution to the wind. We must continue to follow restrictions and really get this virus under control. A significant concern for many is the small number of people recently identified in Harrow who have been tested positive with the South African variant, and the surge testing is going well in those areas. The real way to get a virus under control is through vaccination, in the same way other viruses have been brought under control in the past. From all the data and feedback, the COVID vaccination programme is going very well in Harrow. I had my first jab last weekend and I'm here tonight to tell you all about it. But actually, I'd like to invite our Chief Executive, Sean Harris, to give you a detailed COVID-19 update, which has become a regular and welcome agenda item at Cabinet meetings throughout the pandemic. As usual, Sean will be using the presentation that has been published on the Council website and is now displayed on our screens. So, Sean, over to you.
Thank you, Graham, and thank you, Cabinet. I will canter through this at a reasonable rate in order to allow any questions, and obviously there are a number of other items on today's agenda. So what we're here for is to provide an update, how we're doing in Harrow, what the situation is in London in relation to COVID, to talk about the national lockdown position and the roadmap out of lockdown, looking at the Council's response, providing a detailed update on the vaccination, and also to begin to start a discussion about what will happen post this emergency phase of the pandemic as we move into recovery. So just in terms of the overview, the first thing to say is that obviously the restrictions that have been in place over the past number of weeks have resulted in a major reduction in COVID-19 cases. We are now in a position of cases which were last seen at this level in October. And I'll go into a bit more detail on this in the next slide. And Harrow is now at just under 60 cases per 100,000 people, which is still quite high. But at the peak of the second wave, we were at almost 1,000 cases per 100,000 people. So that is a very, very significant reduction. Cases have increased very slightly over the past week. I think in Carol's slide next, it is a degree of inevitability as there's a greater degree of mixing either through school or other activity. So it's why it's very important, as Graham said, that we re-emphasise people maintaining the restrictions and that we work on the broader strategy relating to vaccination. Good news is that hospital admissions, occupancy, serious cases in intensive care and deaths have fallen substantially over the last month and continue to do so. But the numbers of people in hospital with coronavirus is still quite significant, and there's obviously a way to go before the NHS is back to normal and being able to deal with non-COVID cases at the scale that we would want and expect them to do. But things are very much going in the right direction. As we know, the government announced a detailed lockdown exit roadmap on the 22nd of February, and that covers the period from restrictions lifting on the 8th of March until hopefully almost all restrictions will be gone by the 21st of June. As I said, I will update on the vaccination programme, which is overall going very well. So this slide covers the data in a bit more detail that we've just talked about, shows the number of cases overall. It talks about the cases in the over 60s and also recognises that positivity testing is at 2.2%. All measures are going in the right direction, but there is still quite a lot of work to do to continue to suppress case levels to the point where we would want them to be, and also in parallel make sure the vaccination is rolled out, but going in the right direction. In relation to the roadmap, this was, as I said, published on the 22nd of February, and the first major change which happened was that schools fully reopened on the 8th of March. I have to say that that was something that went very well in Harrow. There was a huge amount of work from schools, head teachers, staff at all levels, working with the trade unions, parents, and actually that has been a very successful exercise, and schools have reopened, which is obviously a major milestone in continuing to get back to supporting children's education. Obviously as well that we are working hard on developing plans for the further changes which are planned in stages in April, May and June. And in broad terms, the Council is involved in supporting the roadmap in 4 main areas: advice and enforcement, both to businesses and the community, around ensuring that there's sufficient capacity around testing, continue to support track and trace, which is an important part of continued virus suppression, investigating our work around the variants of concern, and supporting the rollout of the vaccination programme. And just to provide a little bit more detail, there are broadly 3 phases to the recent release of lockdown. A small number of changes along with the schools reopening in March, with some additional ability for people to socially distance and meet up outside from the 29th. Much more substantial changes potentially from the 12th of April, when non-essential retail and outdoor hospitality will be allowed. In May, from the 17th, the potentially of a broader reopening of the hospitality, and then hopefully by the 21st of June, we will see the situation where there are no restrictions in terms of what people are allowed to do. Although we are anticipating that there would still be various restrictions in place in terms of how businesses and offices need to be run, and that's one of the things that will come out in terms of more detail over the next few months. All of these, as the government has made clear, are subject to meeting a whole number of tests around infection levels, vaccination rates, and the position in relation to the variants. So this slide just summarises the work that we've been doing in phase 1, supporting schools, continuing to develop the test, track and trace and community testing, support the vaccination rollout, and make sure that we are continuing to plan for the enforcement that's in place in order to be able to suppress the virus, and continuing to support local businesses with many millions of pounds of government grants, and also to start planning for the next phase. And as we get ready for phase 2, lots of work to practically support businesses to reopen, informing residents about that, and actually starting to plan to reopen some of our own council services, such as libraries and leisure centres, and also beginning to engage and thinking about what the council's support for local businesses and the economy are going forward. And you'll see there's a report on the Cabinet this evening, which is going to cover some of our work around business support, and obviously planning for our own buildings as we start to reopen at some point during the summer. Also just wanted to mention the community testing programme. This has changed significantly since it was introduced in the summer, and that's involved us having to change the size and scale of some of our work, because there are now many other routes available for people to get lateral flow tests. But the key message is as we go through an unlocking process, whether it's people having children going to school, whether it's when we start reopening non-essential retail, as people start to enjoy normal life more, Really important that people continue to get tested using the available sites or other mechanisms, and that people do that twice a week, because it's a really good way of identifying people who are asymptomatic. And if we can continue to stop the spread of the virus as the vaccine programme rolls out, that would be very helpful and effective. And we're also pleased, and there's a formal recommendation at the end, that the government has agreed to meet and fund all our reasonable costs with this programme. This next slide goes into a bit more detail in terms of the way in which we've moved from a sort of mass testing to a community testing model. We've reduced from 5 large sites to 5 smaller sites, but with an expectation that we'll be able to ramp this up again as we get an increase in demand. And also this has been very much involved in supporting the surge testing. So I think the community testing infrastructure is there, it's been well used, we want to encourage people to do so, and as we go through the unlock, this will become increasingly important. Councillor Henderson, the Chair, mentioned in his introduction the importance of making sure that we are engaged with the whole strategy around managing variants of concern. We have recently updated and developed our outbreak management plan, which is one of the key areas which we'll look at in terms of variants of concern. And as people will be aware, 2 cases have been identified in Harrow recently, 1 case in Headstone North, 1 case in Wealdstone, and a strategy has been put in place, which I have to say has been done incredibly well and incredibly quickly by council officers working in partnership with our local contractor, number 8, and also with Public Health England and the Department of Health and Social Care. And we've done that really effectively, and that's now up and running, and around up to 5,000 tests in each case will be undertaken to increase surveillance. And I think one of the things it's worth mentioning to Cabinet, we anticipate that this will probably be something that happens very regularly throughout COVID, and it's an important part of the process of being able to get on top of any variants who might ultimately either spread the virus more quickly or be more resistant to vaccinations. This slide just picks up a little bit more detail about the research testing. It says that we're testing for the South African variant. These were picked up as part of the random national sampling, and I'm also pleased to say that the individuals concerned isolated and have recovered well. And we've put together, as part of our outbreak management plan, the rationale for how we do the surge testing, areas surrounding cases, workplaces or schools not applicable in these particular cases, etc. So we've actually started this week that door-to-door testing that's taking place, and also inviting local people and businesses to come in for testing at Harrow Arts Centre, and there'll be a pop-up unit covering Wealdstone High Street over the weekend. And the amount of public interest and the engagement has been excellent, and we've already administered over 1,500 tests in 2 days. So a really important piece of work that's been done. We had our plans in place, we were asked to put them in place. It went really well and really smoothly, and it's an important part of being able to help and manage the virus over the longer term. Just also want to talk about vaccination. Our local NHS partners have done a really effective job in rolling out vaccination in Harrow, particularly initially to cohorts 1 to 4, those people over 70 and the clinically extremely vulnerable, and now very much into the next phase of cohorts, which is basically everybody over 50 and the clinically vulnerable, the timetable for which is to have completed that by April. So 2 things are happening at the moment: really big push to vaccinate everyone in those cohorts, but also really importantly to get the numbers as high as possible in the most vulnerable cohorts. Every person over 80, every person who's clinically extremely vulnerable who's vaccinated, massively reducing the risk of people being hospitalised or dying. So it is important to get everybody vaccinated, but also to really get the numbers up amongst the most vulnerable. And also to make sure that we reach into the communities, the areas of the borough, particular ethnic groups who have been more vaccine hesitant, and to actually work with them very closely through our targeted outreach work and through the CCG to develop that. And we are working on a detailed plan at a borough level with the CCG in order to be able to do that. And I'm pleased to say that Harrow's mass vaccination site at Byron Hall will be going live on the 30th of March. So that will be further capacity in the system. And I know that there are obviously concerns about media reports about the size and scale of further expansion due to vaccine supply availability, but that won't affect the next phase of the process, which is going through at the moment. This slide, which I won't go through bullet point by bullet point, but is there for the record, talks about the level of vaccination that we have in the different cohorts, and as you can see, they are very high. But if we can add, 3, 4, or 5 percentage points, particularly to the most vulnerable categories, that will make a big difference in terms of hospitalisation, death, and risk. And also to say that we've done really well at hitting some of our more challenging groups. For example, we have now got to over 50% of social care staff overall, and I'm pleased to report that in terms of council social care staff, it's well over 70%. So all progressing well. We must keep pushing for the most vulnerable and also the highest risk cohorts. So that, Chair, is a broad summary of everything that we are doing in relation to COVID. But obviously, one of the things that I started to talk about at the last meeting was what happens over the next period of time. And we will be in a pandemic response still for a period of time going forward. But we do need to start to plan for what the rest of this year looks like, because although COVID will dominate our activity, it will be dominating our activity in a slightly different way as we move from dealing with the emergency to how we move beyond the emergency going forward. So we have got a series of planning assumptions in place. The emergency will last at least until June. We'll need to start working out about what we do with a number of our COVID specific services, partly decisions by ourselves, but also anticipation that the government will continue to want us to do activities such as testing. And actually we need to work out how we plan for a more return for business as usual for our services over the summer, and hopefully be in a position to have something that's looking much more like normality from September this year. And then in parallel, of course, we'll have to put our mind towards, which we already are doing, thinking about challenges around the economy, health, education, etc. And I think this just really underpins that although the resources will be not spending as much managing an emergency, there'll be as much, if not more, work to support the recovery and the challenges left by COVID as there has actually been dealing with the pandemic itself. So just a number of areas that we'll be focused on: our COVID-19 work, delivering our core services, delivering a whole series of important corporate initiatives, and working on recovery. So it is a very specific, very challenging ask to do all of these things overall. And one of the things that we'll need to keep bringing forward to the Cabinet is the challenge that we will have in relation to managing all of the different aspects of the Council's work for the rest of this year. In this slide, which I won't go through each bullet point, it starts to pick up some of the key aspects of recovery. Obviously, supporting the NHS through social care to get back onto elective and non-urgent care. Obviously, ensuring that we work and support with schools in terms of supporting the catch-up programme. Obviously, dealing with the challenges for individuals and businesses in terms of the likely economic impact that we'll see with COVID when the business grants are no longer there or furloughs ended. And similarly, we know that there will have been lots of impact around people's mental health, hidden harm, and exacerbating many of the issues such as health inequalities that were there before COVID but have been brought very much to the forefront of the mind for the work. So a lot of work to do across a whole range of activities. The Council working with our own services, but also working in partnership with many others. So it is probably the case that it will be at least another year, if not 18 months, before things get back to some form of different but equivalent pre-COVID scenario at some point during 2022. And obviously, one of the things that we'll be, quite focused on is what we'll be doing in the immediate. And this slide just picks up that we'll be focusing very much on the areas of education, the economy, poverty and hardship, and also ensuring the Council as an organisation is in a position to recover, to consolidate some of our work on modernisation and ensuring that we support staff resilience and capacity over what has been a particularly challenging period of time. But as we go through cabinet meetings during the remainder of this year, there'll be updates around what we're doing in all of these key areas and where our current focus around priorities will lie. So, Chair, that was a quick run through all aspects of the work that we're doing around COVID. I think in terms of summary, clearly the national lockdown and everything associated with that has reduced case rates, pressures on the NHS, social care, etc. We know what the roadmap looks like, and that all things being equal, that will happen in a stage and phased way over the next 3 months. We've got a number of roles for the council in terms of supporting that roadmap, particularly around testing, variants of concerns, and the vaccination programme, which is going very well. But as I've said and wish to emphasise, really important that we continue to both vaccinate the mass of the population as quickly as we can, but also to get the vaccination levels as high as possible for the most at-risk groups. We are starting to plan and do work already on resilience and ensuring that the capacity is in place to deal with that. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that although things are clearly getting better in terms of COVID at the moment, it will continue to dominate the council's work and priorities for many months to come, and that's something that we have to be aware of in terms of challenging the organisations and staff's resilience. And finally, Chair, there is a slide at the end which is just identifying 3 recommendations for formal decision making, because as part of the community testing programme, the council is going to be spending just over £2.5 million and carrying out potentially 70,000 asymptomatic tests over the period in question, and the government have committed to reimburse all our reasonable costs and actual costs of that of delivering that. But given the size and scale of that sum of money, it was important that there's a formal decision made by the Cabinet relating to that. So thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Sean. It's a lot of detail in the report and in the presentation. That is available for download from the council's website, and it is being published into other reports as well, so it's freely available information. We now move to questions. Paul, you have your hand up.
Thanks, Leader. First of all, thank you, Sean, for that update. I just want to say 2 things. One, I'm particularly grateful for the briefings that we've had as an opposition on surge testing. I think they were very helpful, and I know from speaking to my ward colleagues, or ward councillor colleagues in our group, they're very grateful for the briefings that they received. So I'd just like to thank Charlie, Carol and team for that. I think they were very helpful, and I think it's important as sort of leaders in our community that we are able to communicate effectively with the right information for residents, because rumours can quite quickly get out of hand on these things. So us knowing what's going on is really important. So I'm very grateful for that. The other point I'd just like to raise, and it's more for the next cabinet meeting, is it'd be helpful if either as part of this, which has been very and rightly external focused, we have a bit more detail on staff welfare and staff resilience. I don't know if it's part of this report or maybe part of a report that goes alongside the accommodation strategy, if that goes to the next council meeting. But as the leader said, it's now been a year that we've been in this kind of stage. I think that's a really appropriate time to kind of look at staff welfare, staff resilience, and to try and have a discussion around, you know, what we can do going forward. I mean, I'm conscious of, you know, the fact that appraisals might not have been happening in the same way. I know people have had lots of holiday that they haven't been able to take or have got to carry over. Obviously, people have been working very long hours, and how that can continue, and just the isolation that some of our staff must be feeling if they haven't been able to come in, if they have been isolated this time. So just maybe if we, because we are an employer as well as a you know, the community leader, and just how we deal with that as employers, I think would be really helpful, because I know there are some issues that we really need to, that have been addressed, but we need to just be aware of, I think, as councillors.
Thank you, Paul. I really appreciate those comments, and I think it would be very helpful and appropriate to, as part of our update next time, to include more on that. It is something that we have worked very hard on, and something that does obviously bring its challenges. And I think part of the reason in my presentation I was emphasising the rest of this year is, I mean, I'm sure we will, all be absolutely delighted when, the vaccination programme has achieved its targets. The number of cases of coronavirus has gone down significantly. But I do think that actually, in terms of the amount of work that coronavirus in its broadest sense will bring to the council and to the community more generally, that will continue for some time to come. So in planning ahead, we do need to be conscious of everything that you talked about, but I'm very happy to include more detail in that in the next update, which I think will be very helpful. So thank you for the question.
Thank you. I also just think the mental health aspect sometimes a delayed reaction, so just how we can support staff when it comes to any kind of mental health support we can give them, I think will be really important. Yeah,
that's great. Yeah, and we've been doing that through our staff surveys and through support. But yes, very happy to report on that. It will be a very helpful thing to do. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Paul, and thank you, Sean. Is there any other questions on the updates? So thank you, Sean, for the update. We also say actually thank you to Charlie and Carol. When we got notified of the variant, Charlie was on holiday, I think, or meant to be, and did get back to work straight away to coordinate all this to make sure we had an effective response alongside Carol. And Carol spends most evenings, I join meetings in most evenings of the week, and Carol's always on them with the community, giving the presentations around it, and puts a lot of time into it, because she then sends me emails in the morning about 7 o'clock to tell me what I need to do for the rest of the day. So thank you to all the officers in the council for the amount of time they have put in, but it's also the responses they have made very quickly at times. If you look back over the last year, they have made some very quick responses to urgent actions, and I think it's gratefully appreciated. Thank you. Oh, Christine, you had your hand up very quickly.
Yes, just very quickly, just to say yes, Paul, you're right. But and actually, Charlie and Carol and Lawrence, working with Carol, they have worked so hard to keep schools informed and turning round on a sixpence. We had 2 briefings organised for this week. One Monday, one Tuesday, both well attended and really appreciated, I think, by the schools. Thank you.
Yes, and I think, as Paul said, they're prepared to turn up to briefings anywhere, really, because they're online, but they do turn up, and you just need to request them there. So thank you very much. We now move on to, also we've got to note the recommendations that are in the last page of the presentation. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We now move on to councillor questions. We've got 7 questions have been submitted, and we will take them in the order they appear in the question pack. Questions not responded to during this meeting will be answered in writing. A total of 15 minutes will be allowed for asking and answering of questions. In order to maximise the time available, the published questions will be taken as read, and we will proceed directly to the answer and supplementary question. So the first question is from Marilyn, directly to me, and has asked whether we will reinstate the local development framework panel for the development of the new local plan. So
yes, Chairman.
So the answer, the response is, Marilyn, the current planning policy working group that replaced the local development framework panel remains a transparent way of considering and debating planning policy issues, as the minutes of these meetings are reported to Cabinet when the matters discussed are formally considered by Cabinet. Any new local plan will be subject to at least 2 formal rounds of consultation, as well as significant stakeholder engagement throughout its preparation. How this engagement is proposed to occur will be covered in a revised statement of community involvement that is currently being prepared. Approaches to member engagement and the role of the planning policy working group will be considered further as part of that process. So Marilyn, did you have a supplementary question?
Yes, thank you very much for that, Leader. It's just that, I mean, we haven't met as a planning policy working group now for about 18 months to 2 years. So even that it hasn't happened, and there's a lot been going on behind the scenes, and I think it's about time we met. And I think that's been acknowledged, to be fair, by the officers, so I think that's fine. But what isn't fine, and I think it's got to a point where we have to start to consider this, is that, as you know, we have the traffic panel, and the traffic panel doesn't make decisions, it's advisory. And a planning policy panel, which I think is probably the right way to describe it now, would be much more open. It would be fully constituted. Residents would be able to make deputations, ask questions, present petitions, and tune in and watch us in an open and transparent way. And so I was rather hoping that you would consider reinstating more of a formal panel of Cabinet to now start to get on and discuss the most important aspect of what we're going to be doing now as regards our local plan, because it really is place shaping. It has a tremendous effect on that which we can grant or refuse. And I think members of the public are very much engaged in this now. We've had a lot of applications that have caused quite a stir, and yet to come many more. And I think that it would be very useful, Leader, if you would agree, and I hope you will, that at some point within the next few months, we reintroduce a proper panel of advisory panel of Cabinet, so that we can have an open and transparent discussion online like this meeting, so that people can understand what we're up to, and that we can go forwards in the right way.
Thank you, Marilyn. There's a number of points you've made in there, and I just want to clarify the difference between them. So the local development framework panel, which you referred to, was set up back, I think, in 2000, and it closed down in 2015. It changed over to the current, what we have is the Planning Policy Working Group. The reason it was because it's a cost to the council and a lot of officer time to prepare agendas, minutes, and the opportunity to attend and ask questions. Although very few people did come along to ask questions, and very few people actually come along to watch the panel meeting either. But I understand your point you're making, that with online meetings, it does make it more conducive to people to actually join in. The difficulty we have is from May the 8th, or is it 9th, the legislation online meeting ceases, and we go back to having meetings in committee rooms, and that legislation has not yet been extended. So it means trying to find a COVID reliant place. My personal view is we might need a hybrid of meetings to be able to do it, but as I say, we have to wait really to see if we get the statement of community involvement right, and that includes how we deal with councillors and reports to councillors, then we can look at it in that way and get a proper way of dealing with it through proper panels that are open and transparent, but also have some panels that are allow for more open, broad discussion regarding policy matters. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that. I do hope you'll consider it anyway, because I think people deserve to know what's going on. The second question, would you like me to read it out? Does the leader want to encourage high-rise buildings and tower blocks in our suburbs? And what action is his administration taking to resist such inappropriate developments?
The council is currently undertaking review of its local plan, which you're aware of, and this will consider the role that tall buildings can play in meeting the increased housing target for Harrow, as set out in the London plan, which has just been agreed, as well as the potentially even higher targets prescribed by government using their standard housing methodology algorithm. As part of the review, a characterisation and tall building study has been commissioned to provide evidence to inform any new tall buildings policy. So such a policy needs to be based on evidence rather than the arbitrary caps on building heights. Otherwise, the policy risks being found unsound at independent examination. This would mean we would either have no local tall buildings policy or would have one imposed upon us. The robust evidence site-based consideration of tall buildings is also important in the wider context of the local plan review, as the plan will have to demonstrate that all potential sources of housing supply have been properly considered, particularly if we cannot identify enough housing capacity to meet the housing targets as set out in the London plan. Otherwise, the entire local plan risks being found unsound, that is, we would have no local plan. So prior to the new local plan, proposals for tall buildings will continue to be assessed against the relevant London plan and current local plan policies. Such policies address matters relevant to tall buildings such as visual impact, character, heritage and impact upon neighbouring properties. The short-term option of a SPD, for example, would be the wrong mechanism in the context of policy D9 of the London plan and would be unlikely to withstand any appeals against any refusals where any height limit prescribed in that SPD was the main reason for that refusal. It would also divert resources away from the local plan review and the adoption of a tall buildings policy for the borough. Thank you, Marion. Did you have a supplementary question, Marion?
Well, I do actually, and I'm afraid you won't be surprised to hear, Leader, that I disagree with that. It was pretty planning speak of an answer, which I'm sure somebody wrote very ably for you, but I take a different view. We can and should, in my view, because we won't have our local plan ready to carry weight now for at least another couple of years. And I think we should and must look at some of the sites that are developable and adopt, and it's perfectly reasonable to do this. And I know for a fact that the answer you've given is not right, although I'm sure that you were content to read it and it has been written to you by one of our officers. But in actual fact, I know for a fact that we can legitimately adopt SPDs that actually hang off our current core strategy. They're not they don't carry as much weight as obviously a new local plan would carry in the future, but they would help at least somewhat to resist some of the excesses that we've seen, as we saw last night with the 12-storey high dander living developments that, thank goodness, the officers recommended for refusal on Vaughan Road. But we have already set a precedent of 8 stories high on that site, and that was our fault because we gave ourselves permission for that. So what I'm really saying is that the residents are very anxious about this, and I think that there is something we can do. It's not perfect and it's not ideal, but for the time being, it will help us somewhat. And I'm disappointed to hear the answer you gave. But in actual fact, what I really wanted to know is, do you encourage high-rise buildings? Because the way that your administration is going about this, you're actually doing it by not agreeing to what we can to resist them. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. You made a number of points, and I'd just like to correct you on a number of things. Google's a wonderful instrument, and over the last few months I have been looking up the changes in legislation and its fundamental meaning. And if you want to look up the Town and Country Planning, Local Planning England regulations of 2012, it sets out quite clearly that you cannot put a SPD in place that is in conflict with what is already stated within the local plan. It would automatically fail, and you may laugh, maybe you need to read it, Marilyn, because there's so many other points in the legislation. We'll take on court cases where the SPDs have fallen down and planning permission has been given on the basis that they've relied on an SPD to set height limits when it's already detailed within the local plan. They said planning obligations mitigate the impact of, which one is it? I've got quite a few here. So I was looking them all up on Google, and it's a wonderful thing really, because it gives you the factual information rather than outdated information around some of these things. So it says supplementary planning documents build upon and provide more detailed advice or guidance on policies in an adopted local plan. As they do not form part of the development plan, they cannot introduce new planning policies or restrictions into the development plan. So to try and put in the tall buildings restriction within the London plan for an SPD would automatically fail at an appeal. Now, you're shaking your head, but I'm trying to get through this quite quickly.
I suggested So I'm not
the
suggesting
decision
we
would
do
rely
it.
on a policy that doesn't apply. Even if an inspector considered that policy under D9 did apply, that policy indicates that heights areas should be identified in local plans, not SPDs. Even if an inspector considered the use of an SPD appropriate, the intent of the proposed SPD that you talked about to specify and limit the height of new buildings to a maximum of 6 stories high is an arbitrary figure that is not evidenced and has not been subject to the same rigor independent examination as a policy in a local plan. And it is a decision for a decision maker to determine what weight is given to a material consideration such as an SPD. So for the reasons I've just given, and there are probably more, it is likely an inspector would give such an SPD limited weight in deciding the merits of an appeal. If you want to move to the other points you make, because the time is clocking away, I am not in favour of overly tall buildings in a wrong environment, but sometimes you need to look at what it is, and that's why the tall building policy that we have in Harrow allows us to challenge some of these applications in the right and proper way. When we got as I said earlier on, under the borough plan which was being developed, there is a tall buildings policy that's in there, and that will be considered as part of the development of the plan. So thank you very much.
I can't agree with any of that, but thank you, Leader.
No, but I can send you all the legal parts that with councils who've been taken to court over applications.
You don't need to. I
with
understand
factors.
very well. Thank you.
Right. So we now move on to question number 3, which is from Councillor Norman Stevenson to Councillor Varsha Palmer.
I take it that you don't need me to read out the question?
No, that's fine, Norman. So your question was, could I explain the plans for controlled LTNs to help Harrow businesses? So thank you, Norman. Nice that I've got somebody else to ask a question. As you are fully aware, there is an ongoing consultation on LTNs at this moment in time. And the question that you've asked, there is an explanation on the document that has been sent out. So I would suggest at this point that the businesses respond to the consultation and put their views forward. Do you have a supplemental?
I do, yeah. Thank you very much for that. I will tell these businesses, but I've spoken recently to a number of funeral directors, that's undertakers in the borough, and they're concerned that their vehicles may be fined when visiting residents. In addition, they fear they'll be fined when driving hearses past the homes of deceased, which is often the custom on their way to funerals. So I just wanted to ask, have you considered complex situations such as this in your plans?
I can't preempt the conclusion of the consultation. That's why I said if they respond to the consultation and all the views will be taken on board. Once we know what the resolutions are and the recommendations that are going to TARS up, then obviously we will look into all the different businesses and areas. And of course, we do look at all the different businesses as well. And we have kept in touch during the whole of the lockdown to ensure that everyone is well informed and knows what's going on, etc. as well, including the funeral directors. So, Norman, your second question was...
So the next question is from...
Norman.
I think it's from Councillor Anjana Patel, isn't it?
No, Norman's got another question
Norman.
as well.
Sorry. Good point.
Okay.
Number 3.
Yeah, number 4. So you've asked me, Norman, do we consider that the council engages with and consults businesses? So similar to what the first question that I've just answered, the views of the local community are extremely important in reviewing the schemes, as I've always alluded to. But as I've said earlier, we have been in contact with the businesses, same as all the other stakeholders, giving them the correct information and correcting the false information that has been fly posted in the areas, and explaining that the feedback will be collated and reported to the TARSAP meeting. So they have been treated like all other stakeholders in this consultation, and we do, as I've just said in your previous question, regularly engage with all our businesses on our enforcement side to ensure they have all the information that they need, but working with Mark Billington's team, which I know that you're in constant touch with, so that we all get the right messages out that are needed for our businesses. Do you have a supplemental for me?
Yes, thank you, Varsha. Thank you for that response and explanation. I mean, this one I find interesting in view of what you just said, because I've been contacted over the last few weeks, and this is, bear in mind, this is in relation to all the original stuff about LTNs in particular. But these are businesses in West Harrow that have contacted me, and they say they hadn't been consulted, certainly not in the past, about this. They were just brought in, etc. And what they did was they flagged up their concerns with their 3 ward councillors, the Labour councillors there, who completely ignored them and their request for help. Now that doesn't really fit with what you said. Now, these businesses have told me that, and these plans, these enforcements that had been brought in at the time adversely affected their businesses. So is this really an example of you supporting and engaging with and consulting Harrow's businesses?
Okay, so first and foremost, the ward councillors have engaged with the businesses and residents. They've had many meetings, and I'm sure my colleague, Councillor Robson, will confirm that, and Adam as well. We engage with everyone and positively, and we do listen to their concerns and address them as necessary. So I'm quite happy that we do engage. When I say enforcement, I mean that we go and explain to businesses what the law has said in all the different changes. We ensure they know what the expectations are. We don't go in there fining them, we go there in advising them. So that is where that comes from. You say West Harrow, but we engage with businesses all around the borough. So if there's a certain business who feels left out, then obviously I don't have that information. If you want to pass the information to myself or Adam or Christine, then we'll certainly look at that for you.
Yeah, I mean, are they telling me lies? They tell me that
I can't.
So, you know, I'm speaking. You know, they've asked me to speak, and I just think it's a shame. But maybe out of this meeting we'll have a chat about it. Thank you.
Definitely. You know, any time offline if you want to have a chat. I don't have an issue with that, Norman. Pleasure to do that with you.
Thank you, Norman and Varsha. We'll now move on to question 5, which is from Councillor Anjana Patel.
Okay, so. Hello, Anjana. Hi.
Yeah,
so your
question.
Yes, I do. And you say, do I believe that LTN schemes are a good use of taxpayers' money? So, Anjana, I don't know how many times I can say this to you, but you know, I have said this many times to you, that the schemes were funded by the government, by the TfL, which all the London boroughs bidded for and were successful in the various schemes that were put forward. So if you are still not satisfied with what I'm saying, maybe you need to just ask Boris or Janik, and they can explain to you whether it's a good value, because it's them who put that funding out there for us to bid. Thank you. Do you have a supplemental?
I don't agree with you, Asha, because you can tell me what you have told me, but it wasn't the government who's asked you, and it's not all the boroughs who's taken money. So please don't tell me to ask Boris or Jedrick, whoever, because as far as I'm concerned, you could have not taken the money and put people's life in misery the way they are. You really have.
Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do. The people of Harrow are really distressed about what is going on. Yes, I do. And the money is not actually very well spent, whether it is government giving you money or whether it is Harrow Council spending it. Anyway, in the budget, you announced plans to spend a further £328,959 on LTNs to install and maintain NPR cameras. This is on top of the thousands of pounds spent on the planters you have used to block up Harrow's roads. Each wooden planter has cost residents £1,382. Surely, if you have all this money to spend on LTNs, which have caused misery for local people, then you really cannot keep banging on about being underfunded.
Okay, well, thank you for that. So you're going on about the cameras. As I've said to Norman, there's an ongoing consultation, which is what I've always said would happen. So residents can put their views forward. We don't know the conclusions of that, so we shall have to wait for the recommendations to see whether any cameras are going in or out or amended or whatever. And then once we see what the recommendations are to the TARSAP, then we can move forwards as to what that spend will be. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I hope that the consultation will speak for itself.
Thank you very much. We now move on to question number 6 from Councillor Richard Allman, which is directed at Councillor Adam Swirsky. Richard, I thought I saw you there somewhere.
I hope you can see and hear me now. Incidentally, Leader, I think you were just showing off earlier on how youthful you are, that you've only just been offered your injection. Anyway, this is to Councillor Swirsky. Does the council have no strategy in place to tackle its financial challenges?
Thank you, Councillor Ahmed, and I can say that I sadly have not been offered my injection yet, so that really does prove something. I would say we do have a strategy, absolutely, for tackling our financial challenges, and that's why over the past few years we've consistently delivered underspends on our budget as of outturns. It's allowed us to build up sufficient reserves to cope with financial shocks in the future. What's outside of our control is the total lack of any long-term planning by central government for local government finances, which is why so many councils are now facing effective bankruptcy, and indeed the previous budget included a range of capitalisation orders where central government bailing out councils of a variety of parties because there is no long-term plan for local government finance. Our strategy is making sure that no matter what happens from central government, we will be able to manage our finances effectively.
If you do have a strategy, you should have told whoever wrote paragraph 1.83 of your revenue budget, because it said in terms the council must have a strategy in place to tackle its financial challenges, and vaguely promised something by summer or autumn this year. Why is there the conflict between what you've just told us verbally and what your revenue budget said in writing?
I don't think there's a conflict at all, Councillor. We've had a financial strategy for many years to make sure that we tightly control spending in order to deliver within our budget, which we've successfully managed to do, building up sufficient reserves to manage against financial shocks. I don't think it's at all vague to say that we will be coming forward with proposals to meet future budget gaps over the summer and autumn. And that's, of course, because we don't have a crystal ball around how the pandemic is going to develop and indeed how government is going to respond with potential future emergency funding and a potential future spending review. We were told the government would come forward with a long-term spending review last year. That didn't take place. There were some understandable reasons for that, but equally the lack of any solution on social care funding, the lack of any indication of the future of local government finance leaves all councils in a state where we have to second guess what the future will bring. And as such, it's completely prudent to wait until the summer, until the early autumn, before coming forward with any more detailed plans on how we might tackle future budget gaps.
The next one is to Councillor Palmer. I don't know if she'll offer me the enticing prospect of a chat which she offered to Councillor Stevenson earlier on, but anyway, let's see. Does the council have a strategy to increase its commercial income from the depot and elsewhere?
Well, as you know, Councillor Almond, the whole strategy
this is to Councillor Palmer.
I appreciate that, and apologies. I should have said that because this is a financial question, I'm going to pick this one up. That's okay. So, and of course, it is also a question about commercial income, which also comes under my portfolio. I take full responsibility for that as well. So, as you know, our strategy around commercial income was based on a plan to try and ensure that we made the minimum number of frontline cuts in response to the austerity programme, the £50 million cut in our government grant. We started a whole range of initiatives, some which with mixed success. We've had this conversation over many years. Some of them generated additional excess income for us. Some of them were not successful. I think in the depot, what we made sure is that as we've detailed out exactly how the depot will be developed and the services within that, that we have de-risked the budget by taking out the income savings that were in the budget. to make sure that we're not reliant on those. Of course, if there are opportunities to generate commercial income, we will take those. But we're going to be focusing on delivering that site to deliver ultimately the most effective and efficient services for people in Harrow.
Your outturn figures to the end of Q3 of the last financial year, in other words, to the end of December, gave us quite a bit of detail on how you had lost income compared to your projections regarding the depot, for example, 681,000, and you're projecting 250,000 further loss of income, for example, from commercial activities and trade waste. The question specifically was how you, and I understand fully you've had huge extra difficulties in the past year since the beginning of COVID. The question was specifically to get an indication of how you're planning to fill in those extra holes that have developed in the past year, and you didn't deal with that at all.
Well, I think there's two different elements here. I mean, one is how we're overall managing our budget, and you can see that with all the ups and downs that we have, and we know that there are some challenges, we've also managed some spending very well. And as a result of all the ups and downs, we've come out with a in fact, we're projecting an underspend this year that will help us to make sure we can go into next year confident we don't need to make frontline service cuts. So for all ups and downs, I think we're coming out actually very strongly from this year. The next question is, well, on the depot site, how do we get best value for Harrow residents from that depot site? And that depot site is a major investment in an amenity for Harrow. It provides us with office space for staff at the Civic Centre, for Harrow Council staff, gives us a lot of flexibility around how we manage work and the working arrangements in the future. It also modernises our facilities around the depot and the range of services provided from that site. So it's absolutely the right thing to do to invest in that site. It'll be a modern, fit-for-purpose facility for the future, and we can all be proud of it. It's coming up. You can walk past and see it's looking really good. It'll be up and running later this year. And of course, as there are opportunities to generate any additional income, we will take those, but we're not putting them in the budget.
Thank you.
That's very satisfactory, but still, thank you.
That concludes the cabinet questions. And if you haven't booked your vaccine yet, Richard, you need to go and book it immediately.
Oh, Chelsea have had 11 batches undefeated since they had mine.
I didn't think they had it 2 years ago. That now moves us on to item 6, which is the key decision schedule, which is March to May 21. Can you please note in the reports that the Treasury Management, the shared service arrangement with the Greater London Authority, has been deferred to the April Cabinet meeting. So can you note the key decision schedule, which is on pages 7 to 20?
Noted. Noted.
We now move on to progress on scrutiny projects. So can we note the update on pages 21 and 22?
Noted.
Thank you. We now move on to the additional restrictions grants policy revision, which is on pages 23 to 62. Keith.
Yes, thank you, Leader. You'll see in the paper that we've been awarded an additional 2.3 million from the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and we have to agree the options and principles for allocating that additional funding. Excuse me. You'll see that there are 3 streams of funding that we are proposing. First of all, the Business Improvement District in the town centre. We're suggesting that we fund the Business Improvement District in 21-22 and not ask the businesses in the town centre to pay the 1% bid levy as a result. We will also support those businesses that would have difficulty paying the 1% levy in this financial year, 2020-21. The second is to support traders associations or local partnerships where there are no traders associations, to the tune of £10,000 each to each traders group to help develop their organisations and promote their district centres. And also the third one is to address issues where businesses have slipped through policy gaps, such as are listed in paragraph 2, A, B, C and D. We believe that the effect of this pandemic on businesses has been fairly terrible, particularly in the town centre, and this would be the most appropriate use for the extra additional restrictions grant that we got.
Thank you, Keith. It's also in your name, Adam. Did you want to add anything more to what's been said?
I won't add anything more to what Councillor Gray said. Very helpful.
Thank you. There's one hand up.
Thanks, Leader. I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you to Mark Billington and his team for briefing Councillor Stevenson and I on this. I think it's a welcome thing. It's a welcome additional pot of money from the government. I'd also just ask if we can, or the Cabinet can, maybe bring forward more details on stuff the council can do to help businesses over the coming months. I know we've just seen some particularly bad news in Pinner of one of the loved businesses, a bookshop, that won't be reopening after this. I suspect that's going to be many similar businesses, and it's just, you know, where the council can help, what the council's policy on business rates is going to be when the government scheme tapers out, how strict we'll be on collecting that, and other things. I think just a strategy coming forward to future cabinets might be helpful, because we really do need to do everything we can to preserve those businesses, especially when they're at the margins, and a small thing either way might be something that can make the difference. Thank you.
If I could just answer that, I think that would be an excellent idea, because there are a lot of programs being run through the Excite program, the Kickstart program, the regular meetings we have with businesses in the business forums, and the tremendous amount of work that the Economic Development Unit is doing, not least in painting murals in Rayners Lane, Wealdstone and various other places to cheer people up. And a lot of this has disappeared under the radar, so I would welcome asking the Economic Development Unit to parade their success in these fields.
Thank you, Keith. Is there any other questions? I think you've hit on an interesting point, that the economic development team is probably a new phraseology in the Oxford Dictionary for the size of what a team really is. There's very few of them, and they're very hard working. And as Paul said, Mark gives some very good presentations around that. And they've put a great deal of time and effort in supporting business throughout the pandemic, and also preparation for the recovery from the pandemic, which Sean was talking about earlier on. And a big part of that would be the economic recovery through our high streets. Much of this happens in the background, organising and holding webinars and training events, right through to bidding for external funding to support businesses. They're also working with other boroughs sub-regionally across North West London to ensure there is going to be an economic recovery, and ensuring our voice is being heard in the levelling up agenda that we hear so much about, which also fits alongside our green agenda, training and skills. So I think from all of us, we're going to pass on our thanks to Mark's team, which fits in Paul Walker's directorate. He sometimes comes along to the cabinet on some interesting reports, but for the size of the team, when you look at the amount of work he brings in, it's an amazing achievement really for all of them. So thank you very much. The recommendation is on page 24, that we agree the recommendations are on page 24. Sorry, so I get it in the right order. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you. That moves us on to item 10, which is the essential heating upgrade works for sheltered schemes, which is Cornell House, Meadfield House and Alma Court. Two of those are in my ward. The report's in Councillor Philadel's name and Councillor Swirsky, but I think, Phil, you wanted Julian to introduce the report.
Yeah, that's right. Julian's joined our team in the housing. He's currently the Director of Housing. Over to you, Julian.
Thank you, Philip. And can I say first off how much I appreciate how welcoming and supportive the members I've met so far and my colleagues have been in the first few weeks that I've been here. So thank you to everybody for that. What I'd like to present to you this evening is a report that you could view as just the replacement of 3 communal heating systems at sheltered housing schemes. But it's much more than that. It's much more exciting than that. We've got Meadfield House, Cornell House and Alma Court, 3 sheltered housing schemes, and their communal boilers, gas boilers, have come to the end of their useful life and need to be replaced. Our proposal is that we should replace those with ground source heat pump systems. I think that's really exciting. I think it shows how we want to address climate change and invest in green energy systems, and demonstrates how we might do that and make a start in that when our own council's housing stock. So obviously ground source heat pump, operates through a system of quite deep boreholes to attract warm air and heat from the ground, natural warm air and heat, and through a series of converters and heat converters produces heating and hot water for the schemes. Very green energy, is very low cost. So we're recommending the installation of these systems. Worth noting that yes, ground source heat pump technology is quite new, and at the moment it does have higher upfront capital costs because of the nature of the equipment that needs to go in. However, we feel that this is offset because 1, it is the most carbon efficient option and therefore a much greener solution. 2, it reduces fuel bills quite significantly and therefore addresses fuel poverty. A 1-bedroom flat, for instance, would have fuel, heating and hot water bills of considerably less than £25 a month. The lifetime cost of ground source heat pump installations is lower. They last for at least 20 years plus the actual kit on the ground, and the boreholes themselves last for over 100 years. And if you compare that with say 5 to 10 years for gas installations, then that is a long lifetime. Servicing costs are similarly quite low for these systems. And we have the opportunity to partially recoup some of the costs through government grants and initiatives that we can apply for. So all in all, I think they are a good deal. They are this opportunity to demonstrate our commitment to tackling climate change and fuel poverty. So the recommendation in the report is to ask Cabinet to approve the procurement process for the installation of these ground source heat pumps, and the recommendations themselves can be found on page 64.
Thank you very much, Julian. Did you want any more, Phil?
No, I think Julian's dealt with it quite well. Yeah, I'd just like to comment, like Julian said, this is the start of our journey in housing to address the climate change within Harrow and to help reduce fuel poverty. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one hand, which is Varsha.
I just wanted to say exactly what Phil has said, that I really welcome this. And it is the start of a journey showing that we're taking, it seriously, and we're starting with our stock and that. And, I sit on the climate emergency panel, so I'm really pleased with this. So thank you.
Thank you. And there are other, obviously, technologies that we're also going to be trying to deploy as soon as possible as well and test those out. So this hopefully is the start.
Yes, thank you for coming along, Julian. It's great to see you again. It is a good report in so many ways. I'm chuffed because 2 of them are in my ward, so you picked the best part of Harrow to introduce the heat pump technology. If there's no other questions or comments, the recommendations are in the report on page 64. Are they both agreed?
Agreed. Yeah, agreed.
So that we now.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now move on to item 11, which is property disposal programme 21 to 22. Can I ask that the confidential appendix at item 15 is noted here? Could you please be cautious if asking questions that may relate to this document, or Cabinet will need to move into private session. So, Councillor Ferry, would you like to introduce the report? I think you're on mute, Keith.
It's going at once here. There are a couple of changes. Under the reason for recommendations, it says the 11 disposals. That is incorrect. That should be 9 disposals. And the fourth recommendation should be changed to the corporate director community is tasked with reviewing the options to bring forward Belmont Community Centre and Kings Hill Car Park, property number 9 for development, whilst retaining the community centre. There, as I've said, there are 9 properties that we've worked out are surplus to council requirements. We do this on an annual basis to make sure that we're not holding things that we don't need to and that we can raise some money from them. The first 4 items are where we are selling the freehold of properties, which are for the first 3 are rented out to Chiltern Hundreds Housing Association on a long lease, and the recommendation is that we sell the freehold to bidders, which will probably include the Chiltern Hundreds Housing Association. The fourth one is a block of flats that is in North Harrow, adjacent to the North Harrow Library. The freehold is subject to 625-year leases, and we would sell the freehold, and probably the leaseholders would bid for those. The North Lodge Grimsdyke was previously inhabited by one of the conservators of Harrow Weald. He died. His wife remained in the property until she died. It is in a bad, unmodernised state, and we would hope to attract somebody that would put it back into useful condition. The building rear of Stanmore Hill is a small storage building built behind the main building that we have no interest in whatsoever, and therefore we can dispose of our estate's interest in it. The 7th building is 274 Rayners Lane, the following form of public convenience, just at the top of Rayners Lane by the railway. We have not worked out any necessity for the council to retain their interest in that. It has planning permission to be turned into an office, and we think that that would probably be the most best use of it if it was sold at auction. The land round the rear of Church Road, Stanmore, is a small piece of land in a car park which we have no interest in, and therefore we will dispose of it. And the last one is, as I've said, Kings Hill Drive Car Park and Belmont Assembly Hall, which is presently used by quite a few community organisations, but it is in a bad state of repair. There is asbestos and various other problems with it. It costs an awful lot to run and heat, and we think that the site could possibly be used for redevelopment. But we would have to, first of all, speak to all of the community associations that use that building to make sure that they were able to find somewhere else to operate from whilst we were doing the development. And of course, we would make sure that the development would have enough space so that they could come back at a later date. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith. Paul.
Thank you, Leader. I have a number of problems with this report, 2 general problems and 1 specific problem with recommendation 4. The 2 general comments, the first is I'm not happy with the ward councillor comments section at the end of the report, where it says this report concerns matters which affect the whole borough as it deals with revenue/capital generation. So ward councillors' comments are not considered to be appropriate. I mean, whilst on one level that's true, it does refer to specific buildings in specific wards, and I think we've all seen in West Harrow the difficulty when you dispose of these sites if suddenly things come forward. So I just think a better consultation of ward councillors on these individual properties might have been more appropriate. The second general concern I have is, and again, it might not be appropriate for these sites, but just a discussion by and a consideration by officers as to whether or not either a restrictive covenant or overage clauses should be put on some of these sales. I think, again, given some of the difficulties we've had with other properties might be helpful, albeit I accept in these sites they might not be appropriate. And the final specific thing around recommendation 4, which you've changed, but it still doesn't really, to me, clarify the key thing. It's to bring forward to where proposals. Will those proposals come to Cabinet for consideration, or is it the last we as members will see of it, and it will just be done by the corporate director in consultation with the portfolio holder?
If I can answer those questions, specifically the one at Rayners Lane, we consulted all 3 ward councillors to see if they could find another use for it before we sold it. We didn't think it was appropriate to involve the ward councillors where we were selling the freehold of the property, because we didn't believe that they would have any objections to it whatsoever. When we come, the recommendation is that we sell these, and of course corporate estates will make sure that there is an overage provision in all of these sales when they're sold at auction, and a restrictive covenant if there is any reason to have a restrictive covenant. Of course, if we do have a restrictive covenant, that has the effect of reducing the price that we can realise at auction. So where we have got a restrictive covenant, I would imagine the lodge in Grimsdyke might have a restrictive covenant to say that it could not be used for business or any other purposes. If that is appropriate, then the corporate estate will draft the agreement for sale accordingly. The reason number 4 of the recommendations is that we wanted to make it quite clear that at the moment we just want to do an exploratory exercise involving all the people that might be affected by a development on the Belmont Community Centre site. And if we find that a development is feasible, then that will come back to Cabinet at some stage, possibly in next year's disposals programme.
I mean, if it's something that could be written into that recommendation, that it's not delegating authority to proceed with anything other than quite likely to investigate the options. I just have to say it's that 9th site that the local ward councillors were complaining about to me, that they hadn't been consulted in this, and I think it might have been helpful if they were.
Well, they will be consulted in both the ward councillors and all of the other community organisations that use that. The recommendation says that the corporate director of community reviews the options for bringing forward the Belmont Community Centre and Kings Hill car park for development. That's all he's got. All he's charged to do is review the options.
It just doesn't say where he brings them forward to. If it's bring forward to Cabinet, I think that would be helpful.
Well, if he comes to the conclusion that the development should go ahead, then he would necessarily have to bring them back to Cabinet, because we would hope to that the development will be over the £500,000 limit.
I mean, I just think it would be helpful if we write in, forward to Cabinet. I mean, at the moment, I don't want to call this in, but we have concerns from our ward councillors, and for such a minor thing, which you intend to do anyway, just if we take the doubt away and write that in, I think that would be really helpful and would avoid the unnecessary calling.
Okay, so if we make recommendation 4, the corporate director community is tasked with reviewing the options to bring forward Belmont Community Centre and Kings Hill car park property number 9 for development, whilst retaining the community centre. The results of his deliberations, or the results of deliberations, will be reported to Cabinet when they are finalised.
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, is there any other questions? No, so we've had a change to the recommendations and an amendment to the change to the recommendations, but you've heard what they've said, that most of them are going through, except for the Belmont one, which will come back to Cabinet after a further review has taken place. I think I've summarised it like that. Does that sound about right, Keith?
Yep, that sounds all right to me.
Marvellous. So are those recommendations agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed.
We now move on to item 12, which is a really interesting report. Department for Education, DfE, funded holiday activities and food programme. And do we watch the videos first or do we watch them afterwards? Councillor Christine Robson introduced the report.
Oh, I think people will be too distracted if they watch the videos, Graham. Thank you, Leader. This report describes our planning for the delivery of the Department of Education's funding for our holiday activities and food programme. And we are requesting that Cabinet authorises the issue of a direct award by the Council to the Young Harrow Foundation to coordinate the delivery and evaluation of the programme on our behalf. The amount involved is just over 600,000, and in line with government guidelines, a tenth of that, which is just over 60,000, is set aside for the coordination and evaluation costs. Putting this programme into practice means that we can make use of the government funding, and this fits with our continuing work to tackle poverty and inequality in the borough. We have chosen the Young Harrow Foundation to deliver the programme for us because at this time the council is still very deep in the response to the pandemic, and we would not be able to take this on and do it as well as we would like whilst we have so many other commitments, because there are pressures now from the pandemic which we know are not going to go away, and its effects, financial, physical and emotional, on the people of Harrow. We've got a good partnership with the Young Harrow Foundation, and they have a proven record of being effective and efficient. The programme we've devised has got a good, strong structure and governance, and the details are in the annexes to the report, which you will see, which are clearly written and exhaustive, in fact, in detail, but excellent just the same, I think. The plan is, well, it's just further proof of our excellent partnership that we have as a council with the voluntary sector and with schools. And I have a hope, which is that this might be an outcome of the pandemic that we can put to further good use, that these partnership structures are going to only strengthen as time goes on, and that maybe this will be able to be maintained in some way after the immediate aftermath of the pandemic has been dealt with, so that actually we may still be able to have these structures in place to help the needy in Harrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Is there any questions? Oh, John Higgins.
Thanks, Leader. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, as Christine said, I mean, this is clearly an area of great need. So it's very welcome, this report coming forward. But I think it does demonstrate, the partnership between the council and Young Harrow Foundation, but wider in terms of with the voluntary sector. And we've seen that through the, as we said earlier, report about COVID response in the last year. That partnership has really flourished and matured, and the sector has been able to, by working with the council so well, to respond to a number of areas of need very swiftly and very competently. I mean, I want to sort of reiterate some of what Christine said, that some of the features of that partnership work for me is that it clearly shows a level of maturity between the voluntary sector and the council. The level of trust is clearly there and has increased over the last year, and that also, as Christine said, that there's increasingly a confidence in the sector's ability to deliver, and I think that is very, very much welcomed by the sector, that they feel that there is that level of trust. And I think this report demonstrates that in terms of the amount of money that's been directly awarded to a very, very competent organisation that has a real history of delivery and very well networked in with a number of children's voluntary organisations. And likewise, I'd like to reiterate the hope that as we move forward with the recovery, as was earlier talked about, that we do effectively build on what's been done over the last year in terms of that partnership and what have you. It's very easy and glib to say there's good partnership work, but it hasn't always been the case. I think it's true to say, and I think this is really demonstrating in a microcosm what's been going on in a wider sense, and certainly the sector is very, very keen to build on what's been done. And as has been said earlier, the issue around the sector being able to sustain itself and to deliver locally and local services is ever more pressing because of the pressures from COVID and what have you. So welcome the report, welcome the proposed decision, and hope that we continue to build on such good partnership work.
Fingers crossed, John.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, John. Is there any other comments? I'd just like to conclude, because I like concluding the meeting with a very positive sort of report in a sense. I think John was, has hit upon the nail on the head that 2 years ago, we've built that relationship with the voluntary sector, that when the COVID pandemic hit Harrow, where other councils were setting up their own community hubs and things, we've done a partnership arrangement with the community and voluntary sector that has stood the test of time. We managed to keep most of it going, coming out of the first wave of COVID, and it's quick to build up in the second part. But those relationships are very mature, and has given us the capability to do the things like this. Harrow Young Harrow Foundation have gone out and can look for other support to even top it up even further in some sense and support those young people. And what we mustn't forget is that when we look at it since Christmas, one of the things we have seen across the network, reported back through the schools and teachers, is the effect on mental health of children being away from the younger generation and sort of losing that social contact that they get in the school in a face-to-face environment. And going back on the 8th of March, most of them's probably spent the first week catching up with gossiping rather than really getting to the teaching elements. But I think in a way, this is a very positive report that is making very good use of the funding that's available and actually enhancing it. It's working with the voluntary and community sector to make that, push that even further, and to make sure that our younger generation have got something to look forward to over the coming months and especially over the summer. But the important part as well, that they get a meal in the middle of it all, so no one is left behind, which we have seen in the past at times, when people sometimes go hungry, or we've seen the demand in our food bank still there, but no one's going to go hungry through being on these schemes. And I think it's truly amazing part. Christine did mention it, but if anyone gets the opportunity to actually go through to see what they're actually spending money on, it's quite amazing. The amount of work they're putting in over this summer is truly amazing. And right at the beginning, I did say about videos. Myself and Christine were doing videos to try and publicise this, to get people to sign up to it, and the work programmes that are taking place, getting children involved. And everyone should use their connections to try and get people to get engaged with it. And a lot of it's through the Young Harrow Foundation's website, but it's get them involved, and they can sort of get through a really nice summer for a lot of people. So
that would be good, leader, because it would mean that getting absolutely soaking wet making those videos was worth it.
Rainy and windy, but it was all worth it. And but we won't say any more about the videos. Actually, no, they were good, to be honest. They were very positive, because it is a very positive initiative. And John's point was, we couldn't have done it without the voluntary and community sector at this time. So the recommendations are in the report. Are they all agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. I haven't been notified of any other business tonight, so thank you for your time and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Graham.
Take care.
Right.